David, I was asking a question earlier on about asylum seekers and some of the things that came out of Premier Legault's mouth the other day. I think fair to say embarrassing for many Quebecers when you try scapegoating asylum seekers and refugees for political purposes. Give me your thoughts.
Well, I think it's more than embarrassing. I think it's actually very dangerous for our democracy. And let's not fall into the trap of seeing this as an isolated incident. Let me take a few moments. Let's remind ourselves of a few incidents in the past. I mean, François Legault's former immigration and labor minister, who is still Quebec's labor minister, Jean Boulet, said during the 22 election campaign that 80% of immigrants were lazy and did not want to learn French. That's what he said. Last Easter, on Easter Monday, remember when François Legault tweeted how amazing Catholicism was for Quebec? On Easter Monday, the man who's supposedly the champion of secularism with Bill 21, sending this type of message on the day when, for once, I think it's once every 30 years or so, when you have Passover, Easter, and Ramadan actually fall on the same weekend. And so, and you could go down, 21, 96, but now scapegoating the way he is, and he said before, remember he said if we have more than 50,000 regular economic immigrants, forget about asylum seekers or temporary foreign workers, if we have more than 50,000 a year, it would be suicidal for the nation. Still don't know what the nation means, because I have a suspicion that it's a very, very limited number of Quebecers that fit in François Legault's definition of what a Quebec nation could be. But when you talk about this and you add something like he said yesterday about the fact that the Quebec Court of Appeal judges are somewhat biased because they were named by the federal government. First of all, it is ignorant because it lacks fundamental understanding of how judges are named in our country, or in this country. Yes, the federal government does the nomination, the official nomination for Superior Court and Court of Appeal judges, but it comes from a list that is submitted by the Quebec government, and the federal government never meddles in that list. So all the Quebec Court of Appeals judges, all of them, come from nominations that have been suggested by either Parti Québécois, Liberal Party, or CAQ lists. So this when you start tacking to this debate, not only the completely irrational and unsubstantiated comments of Jean-François Laberge, saying that somehow these asylum seekers are a threat to the nation. But when you start attacking one of the fundamental pillars of our democratic system, this is becoming, and you add up all the comments and all the attitudes, the cavalier attitudes towards the Quebec and Canadian charters of rights and freedoms, and just setting them aside whenever they feel like it, setting aside ethics rules and ethics laws and saying the law's the problem, not my behavior, you're starting to add up something that I say is much beyond embarrassment. It's starting, this is the slippery slope towards soft fascism, Aaron. And mark my words here, this is serious stuff. And let's talk about numbers here when we talk about asylum seekers. I listen to the listeners calling in and the texters texting, and it's a valid conversation to have. But last year in Quebec, we had 60,000 asylum seekers. Big number. When I managed the first asylum seeker crisis back in 17-18, it was 20,000, and that was an explosion. But let's put this in perspective. And this is all StatsCan numbers. A quarter of those asylum seekers leave Quebec right away. When they arrive, they come through Quebec, they go somewhere else in Canada. So that brings the number down to 45,000, okay? About a quarter of that, 11,250, are between the ages of 0 and 14 years of age. So, and that's all the stats that I can get from StatsCan. It doesn't go into more detail. So let's just estimate that maybe 1,000, 2,000 at the most of those kids need actual daycare. And that would mean that everybody is going to want to send those kids to daycare. Some of them might be able to stay home. So whatever number, if our entire system is threatened by a few hundred or maybe 1,000 or so kids going to daycare, look at the reverse problem. If they don't get daycare, that means someone that could work in a system where right now we are in a labor shortage is going to stay home. The reason why we have subsidized daycare, and the stats prove it, and that's why the federal government has made it a priority to make it a national. It inspired itself by taking the Quebec model and making it national. It's because, first of all, it helps women join the workforce, and it helps the economy. It's a positive, and the data shows it. And my final little nugget here is that about between 30 and 40% of all asylum claims are rejected. So that number goes down even more. And the reason why we have this problem is not because we have too many asylum seekers. It's because the federal government, who has the sole responsibility of processing these claims, has been negligent and incompetent in investing the proper resources since 2017. You know the press conference with the 4 ministers this week, Aaron? I did the same thing back in 2018 with the health minister, the education minister, and the intergovernmental affairs minister, asking at the time for over $140 million because of the pressure. Something that should take 60 days according to the federal government's own guidelines, which is treating an asylum claim, now can take up to 2 to 3 years. Imagine if we had an efficient way of treating the asylum claims. You would start off by having 30 to 40% of these claims being rejected and these people being deported.
Yeah.
So this is a real problem. But the thing is to use immigration as a way to antagonize, create fear, create hate. That is something, again, that is akin to political strategies that we equate to fascism. And so, we're seeing it in the United States. We're seeing it in other countries. This is extremely dangerous, especially when you're attacking judges. And what does that mean? Does that mean now that we have to say that the judges in the Quebec court, who are named by the provincial government, that are named by the Legault government, does that mean that those judges are partial to the Quebec government's view of things? If we start down that road, Aaron, we are, we're no longer living in a democracy. Separation of powers and the integrity of the judicial system is key here. And so we cannot take these types of comments from the Premier of Quebec lightly. He thinks he's just trying to score political points against the Parti Québécois. But the fact is, by suggesting something like that and continuing to try to score points on the backs of immigrants who want nothing more than to come here and contribute to society and work at a time where we need them to maintain this model, they're not putting undue pressure on a model. If a few hundred or maybe 1,000 kids are the straw that breaks the camel's back, I think the camel's back was in trouble before, Aaron, and it wasn't because of immigration. Our system has been in trouble for years, and it's never been because of immigration. Never. The fact is that the federal government is negligent and incompetent and responsible for the delays in treating and integrating asylum seekers. But the provincial government is right to ask for compensation because it is federal responsibility, but it cannot do what it's doing now and trying to create this idea and reinforce what it's been doing for years now in saying that immigration is a problem and a threat. That is ugly and it's wrong, and it's not what Quebec or Canada stands for.
Well said, David. I think a lot of people agree with what you said, and I appreciate the passion you bring to this discussion because I think it needs to be there. You're right. We can't just look at this as an isolated example. This has been going on for a while, and it's important to open our eyes to this. So thank you.
Thank you.